For ordinary people, rebuilding would be monumental, and trust in lasting peace was fragile.
The world called it a diplomatic victory, but for those living through it, the future remained uncertain, hope mixed with skepticism.
In Israel, the trauma of rocket alerts lingered, and the psychological scars ran deep.
In Gaza, neighborhoods were rubble, hospitals overwhelmed, and families displaced. Survival became the focus.
In June 2025, a fragile silence fell over Gaza and southern Israel after months of relentless conflict. The ceasefire, brokered under intense American pressure, offered a brief respite, but left behind immense destruction and uncertainty.
Ultimately, the people on the ground live with the results of these high-level decisions.
By examining history and recent events, we can better understand the consequences of American power.
The 2025 ceasefire reignited questions about America's global responsibilities and the true impact of its intervention.
In Congress, fierce arguments erupted, some defending the alliance, others demanding accountability and human rights.
U.S. policy has long prioritized Israel's security, shaping the region's politics and fueling debate at home.
America's deep alliance with Israel complicates its credibility as a neutral broker, even as it pushes for peace.
The United States has always played a complex role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, both mediator and partisan. The challenge remains, balancing a special relationship with the goal of being an impartial mediator.
Yet this unwavering support has faced criticism, especially over settlement policies and peace efforts.
Over time, bipartisan support and powerful lobbying made aid to Israel a political constant.
Cold War dynamics deepened the partnership, with Israel seen as a democratic bulwark.
This alliance, rooted in shared values and strategic interests, became a defining feature of U.S. foreign policy.
America's relationship with Israel, forged after World War II, has shaped the Middle East for generations. The future of this aid is at the heart of America's Middle East dilemma.
The debate over aid reflects the tension between strategic partnership and America's role as mediator.
Calls to condition aid on human rights and peace progress are growing louder in Congress.
Critics argue that unconditional aid reduces leverage for peace and accountability.
Joint projects like Iron Dome highlight deep operational ties, benefiting both nations' defense industries.
This funding ensures Israel's military edge and is formalized in long-term agreements.
U.S. aid to Israel is the most tangible sign of their alliance, billions in military support each year.
The core question persists. Can a nation so entwined with one side ever broker a truly just peace?
America's power enables diplomacy, but its alliances limit its credibility as a neutral broker.
Even with renewed engagement, skepticism remains high on both sides.
Policy shifts, like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, have deepened mistrust and complicated peace efforts.
Palestinians often doubt U.S. neutrality, undermining trust in negotiations.
America's unique position brings both sides to the table, but its deep ties to Israel create a perception of bias.
The U.S. has long cast itself as the primary peacemaker in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, from Camp David to Oslo. This internal struggle within Washington shaped the timing and substance of America's intervention.
The White House was caught between the traditional foreign policy establishment and a rising tide of progressive activism.
Images of destruction increased pressure on the Biden administration.
This polarization makes it difficult to forge a coherent strategy.
Republicans have seized on this division, accusing Democrats of abandoning a key ally.
This divide has turned congressional debates into bitter partisan battlegrounds.
This shift reflects changing attitudes among younger voters.
A growing progressive wing within the Democratic Party has started to challenge the traditional U.S. approach.
In the last decade, this consensus has begun to show significant cracks.
This consensus provided a stable foundation for the U.S.-Israel relationship.
This support was seen as a foundational element of American foreign policy.
This dialogue, conducted over secure phone lines, laid the groundwork for de-escalation.
Washington argued a prolonged war would bring increasing strategic costs.
The Israeli government was navigating domestic pressures, resistant to calls for a ceasefire.
The window for major military operations was closing. The humanitarian crisis and international outrage were becoming unsustainable.
American advisors provided intelligence to minimize civilian casualties.
This engagement aimed to guide Israeli decision-making toward a ceasefire. U.S. diplomats focused on exit strategies and cautioned that military operations would risk a wider regional conflict.
The American strategy employed quiet, persistent pressure.
American officials pressed their Israeli counterparts for clarity and expressed concern over civilian deaths.
Publicly, the White House reiterated Israel has a right to defend itself.
As the conflict escalated, the critical channel was the direct line to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem.
This strategy of separating the immediate goal of a ceasefire from the larger political questions was crucial. It allowed both sides to claim a victory and step back from the brink, thanks to the tireless, often unseen work of the Cairo connection.
The Egyptian mediators, with American backing, worked to sequence these demands into a phased agreement. First, an end to the violence. Then, a discussion of the more complex issues.
The negotiations centered on a quiet-for-quiet arrangement, but the details were, pretty contentious. Hamas demanded a lifting of the blockade on Gaza, reconstruction aid, and the release of prisoners. Israel demanded guarantees of long-term quiet and restrictions on Hamas's ability to rearm.
The Americans could provide the high-level political pressure on Israel, while the Egyptians could handle the granular on-the-ground negotiations with the Palestinian factions, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad.
Therefore, Cairo's interests were largely aligned with Washington's to end the fighting quickly and restore a measure of stability. This alignment of interests made the U.S.-Egypt partnership particularly effective.
For Egypt, this role was about more than just mediation. It was a matter of national security. An unstable and desperate Gaza on its border posed a direct threat, raising fears of a massive refugee influx into the Sinai Peninsula. A wider regional war would destabilize the entire neighborhood.
The Americans and Egyptians had to carefully manage expectations and, honestly, find creative formulas to overcome deadlocks.
The U.S. team in Cairo worked in close coordination with their Egyptian counterparts, providing them with the parameters of what they believed would be acceptable to Israel. This indirect negotiation was a slow, frustrating process, often stalled by mistrust and maximalist demands from both sides.
The diplomatic work in Cairo was painstaking and complex. Egyptian intelligence officials, led by General Abbas Kamel, became the primary conduits for messages between the warring parties. They shuttled proposals and counter-proposals on the core terms of a ceasefire, its timing, duration, and the conditions attached.
The Biden administration activated this crucial back channel immediately, dispatching senior envoys to the Egyptian capital. The road to a ceasefire, as it so often does, ran directly through Cairo.
Cairo has long served as the indispensable intermediary in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Sharing a border with Gaza and maintaining security and intelligence ties with both Israel and Hamas, Egypt was uniquely positioned to act as a go-between.
While Washington held the most sway with Israel, it had, pretty limited direct contact with Hamas, which it designates as a terrorist organization. To bridge this critical gap, the United States turned to its key regional partners, most importantly, Egypt. While quiet diplomacy proceeded in Tel Aviv and Cairo, a much more public drama unfolded at the United Nations headquarters in New York. As the fighting raged and civilian casualties mounted, international condemnation of Israel's military campaign grew louder.
The UN Security Council became a primary arena for this global pressure. Member states, particularly from the Arab and non-aligned blocs, repeatedly introduced resolutions calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. They demanded accountability for the destruction in Gaza and an end to the humanitarian blockade.
This put the United States in a difficult and increasingly isolated position on the world stage. True to its long-standing policy of shielding Israel in international forums, the Biden administration used its veto power in the Security Council to block several of these early resolutions.
The U.S. ambassador argued that these resolutions were one-sided, failed to condemn Hamas for its initial attacks, and would undermine the delicate, behind-the-scenes diplomatic efforts that were underway.
This use of the veto was met with frustration and anger from many allies and international partners. It reinforced the global perception of the U.S. as an obstacle to international consensus and an enabler of the ongoing conflict, even as American diplomats were working furiously to end it.
However, as the crisis deepened, the American position at the UN began to subtly shift. Instead of simply vetoing resolutions, U.S. diplomats started to engage more actively in drafting alternative texts. They worked to insert language that condemned all acts of terrorism and called for the release of hostages, making the resolutions more balanced.
Eventually, the U.S. moved from a veto to an abstention on a resolution calling for a humanitarian pause, a significant and symbolic change. This shift was a clear signal to Israel that American patience was wearing thin and that its diplomatic shield was not infinite.
The pressure was no longer just private, it was becoming public. This evolving strategy at the UN was a key component of the administration's multi-pronged approach.
The public pressure at the Security Council complemented the private pressure being applied directly to Israeli leaders. It allowed the U.S. to tell its Israeli counterparts that international isolation was a real and growing threat, and that even America could not hold back the tide of global opinion forever.
The UN became a theater where the United States could demonstrate the mounting costs of continued conflict to its ally. This carefully calibrated use of diplomatic pressure, moving from outright protection to conditional support, was instrumental in creating the political space needed for Israel to finally agree to a ceasefire.
The ceasefire was a testament to the enduring power of American diplomacy, but the fragility of the peace it secured meant that the work was far from over.
It was a victory achieved not through a single bold stroke, but through a patient and relentless campaign on multiple fronts: direct pressure on an ally, leveraging regional partnerships, and managing international dynamics at the UN.
On a late evening in early June, the announcements came in quick succession, first from Cairo, then from Jerusalem and Gaza. A fragile silence was set to take hold. The American diplomatic effort had succeeded in pulling the region back from the brink.
For Hamas, the promise of eased restrictions and reconstruction aid was enough to agree.
This ceasefire-first approach allowed both Israel and Hamas to de-escalate without appearing to have made major concessions. The U.S. offered guarantees to Israel that it would lead an international effort to fund reconstruction in Gaza, but in a manner that would prevent Hamas from benefiting directly.
The breakthrough came when the U.S. and Egypt presented a unified proposal to both sides. It was a simple, unconditional ceasefire, scheduled to begin within 24 hours. The more contentious issues, such as prisoner exchanges and the Gaza blockade, were deferred to subsequent talks to be held in Cairo.
The secretary carried with him a set of security assurances for Israel and a framework for humanitarian aid for Gaza. His physical presence in the region added a sense of gravity and urgency to the negotiations. It signaled to all parties that the United States was staking its full political weight on securing an immediate end to the violence.
Simultaneously, the Secretary of State embarked on a whirlwind tour of the region, making stops in Cairo, Amman, and finally, Tel Aviv. This was shuttle diplomacy in its most classic form. The goal was to finalize the terms that had been painstakingly hashed out through the Egyptian Channel.
He reportedly assured the Prime Minister that the U.S. would support Israel's long-term security needs and help replenish its defensive systems, but that the fighting needed to stop now.
President Biden made a series of direct, personal phone calls to the Israeli Prime Minister. According to sources within the administration, the president's message was unequivocal. The time had come to end the military operation.
In the final days of May 2025, the various streams of American diplomacy converged into a final decisive push. The humanitarian situation in Gaza had reached a breaking point, and the political pressure on the White House, both at home and abroad, was immense.
This reflects a national debate within Israel about the American alliance and the price of peace. While the United States is seen as an indispensable partner, there is also self-reliance and skepticism toward externally imposed solutions. Many Israelis believe that only they can truly understand the security challenges they face.
From a cafe in Tel Aviv, the perspective is different but no less concerned. Yossi, a tech entrepreneur, expressed a common sentiment. He supported dismantling the infrastructure of groups like Hamas, which he sees as an existential threat. He viewed the American pressure for a ceasefire with a mix of gratitude and apprehension.
The psychological toll on these border communities is immense and often underestimated. In Sderot, the silence that followed the ceasefire was as unsettling as the sound of the sirens it replaced.
This despair fuels contradictory desires for the future. People yearn for an end to violence and a normal life, while demanding justice and an end to the occupation and blockade. Their voices are a testament to the human consequences of a political failure, a plea for dignity.
For many, hope for a political solution has evaporated, replaced by resignation. Years of blockade and repeated wars have created a feeling of being trapped. Spoke of a generation that has known nothing but conflict.
Families faced a daily struggle for food, clean water, and shelter.
The silence was filled with the sounds of grief. His children no longer looked to the sky with wonder, but with fear.
Regional experts viewed the ceasefire as short-term crisis management, not a long-term resolution. Voices from the ground reveal exhaustion with the cycle of violence.
Analysts on the ground were skeptical, arguing the U.S. strategy bypassed the people. It quiets the guns but fails to challenge the underlying issues.
Ending the operation without dismantling Hamas could be seen as a victory for the group.
Analysts offered a sobering assessment, noting the agreement failed to address fundamental issues. Without a path toward ending the occupation, any ceasefire is inherently unstable.
The scenes from Washington were a powerful reminder that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not a distant foreign policy issue for many Americans. The streets of Washington became the arena where personal convictions and political demands were put on public display.
The atmosphere at these demonstrations was often tense, a reflection of the raw emotions the conflict evoked.
Established pro-Israel organizations mobilized their networks, making sure lawmakers heard a powerful countermessage.
Activists engaged in lobbying and advocacy campaigns, targeting members of Congress and officials.
The competing protests turned the Capitol's public spaces into a vivid tableau of the nation's internal conflict.
Pro-Israel rallies gathered to show unwavering solidarity, emphasizing shared democratic values.
Thousands of pro-Palestinian demonstrators marched, chanting for human rights and an end to violence.
The conflict reverberated loudly on the streets of the United States.
The 2025 conflict was fought not only with rockets and airstrikes, but also with images and narratives on a global media battlefield.
This media and public opinion landscape directly influenced the American diplomatic push for a ceasefire. The relentless 24-hour news cycle and the viral spread of information on social media created a sense of urgency within the White House, shaping the perceptions of the American public and compelling the actions of American policymakers.
Legacy news outlets broadcasted powerful images of the destruction in Gaza, generating widespread sympathy.
At the same time, other media outlets focused on the terror inflicted by Hamas's rocket attacks on Israeli towns.
This coverage emphasized Israel's security dilemma and framed its military actions as a justified response to terrorism.
Social media platforms became a key arena for this information war, creating echo chambers with vastly different versions of events.
This digital divide made finding a common factual ground incredibly difficult.
Younger Americans were far more likely to sympathize with the Palestinians.
This demographic shift created a complex political landscape for the president.
The events forced the United States to look in the mirror and ask difficult questions.
America's reaction to the ceasefire was not a monolithic response, but a chorus of conflicted voices. It revealed a nation grappling with its own identity and responsibilities.
This forced a re-evaluation of America's core principles on the world stage.
They drew parallels between the experiences of Palestinians and other marginalized communities.
The conflict brought into focus the changing nature of American identity, prompting a national moment of introspection.
The lesson of 2025 is that managing the conflict is no longer enough.
Ultimately, the ceasefire served as a powerful mirror, reflecting both the strengths and the deep-seated paradoxes of America's role that lurches from one bloody crisis to the next.
The protests, the media firestorm, and the heated debates in Congress all showed that U.S. foreign policy is no longer forged exclusively by an elite establishment.
Another crucial lesson from 2025 concerns the shifting political landscape within the United States itself.
It has become exceptionally good at putting out fires, but it has proven unable to address the flammable conditions that allow them to ignite in the first place.
The American intervention was ultimately an act of crisis management, not conflict resolution.
The Gaza-Israel ceasefire of June 2025 was a testament to the enduring power of American diplomacy. The future of Israelis and Palestinians hangs in the balance, shaped by decisions made in Washington. The silence achieved in June 2025 poses a profound question to the United States. Will it continue to be the region's crisis manager or become a genuine architect of peace? The answer will define the fate of a troubled land and American leadership.
Critics believe the United States has a moral obligation to use its power to bend the region's history toward justice.
This brings us back to the central question. What should America's role be in the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
The 2025 ceasefire offers no easy answers, but clarifies the stark choices ahead. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more informative videos on global events and in-depth analysis.